Well, hello everyone, Texie88 here and welcome to this video. Now this is a very special video for me because I absolutely love the works of Hayao Miyazaki, and as I record this video it is the evening of the 5th of January 2021, and exactly 80 years ago on that particular month and date he was born. And he has become one of the most beloved and respected animation directors in the world. And if he's not listed among the greatest, then he surely deserves to be. At the time of recording this video, he has directed 13 very well received animated films, and every last one of them just has a certain unique magic about it. There may be some common themes in a lot of them, but each one of those 13 feature films has plenty to enjoy about it, which has a familiarity to the others, and yet unique at the same time. I mean, somehow he's able to put drama into a scene in which someone's just drawing plans or writing numbers or something like that. Such is his skill. And although he had worked as something as simple as an in-betweener in his younger working days, he went on to make his directorial debut in 1979 with Lupin Sansei Caliostro no Shiro, aka Lupin III, the Castle of Caliostro. Sometimes they lose the Lupin III bit and just call it the Castle of Caliostro. And that is based on a character called Arsène Lupin, which appeared in Monkey Punch media previously, and there are some actual Lupin III animated series out there. Although some might complain that they toned down the central character's womanizing and other such things. The actual film itself is still a great start to as good a place to start as any is to and you get to see some early seeds being sprouted as to what would appear in his later films, and it's got some great some great hold your breath moments in it, even despite the fact that compared to his later works the quality of the animation is a bit limited. There may have been some budgetary reasons. I mean, he had never sat in the director's chair until this point, so it could be that studios weren't willing to give him too much of a budget at that point. Who knows? But there are still some great moments of traditional hand-drawn 2D cell animation in there, and it's a lot of it's still enjoyable, even 41 years off. 42 years after it was in 2021 now, of course. Then 5 years later came his second directorial work, which was Kaze no Tani no Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And that's where you started to see some of his environmental themes and views taking centre stage, as the titular princess is having a constant battle to try and protect wildlife and stop these large creatures, in particular called omus, from absolutely ravaging, going on an absolute rampage. Usually enraged because other humans are basically causing severe, potentially irreparable damage to the environment. And the quality is notched up even more, so it may be that he had a bigger budget than he had for the Castle of Caliostro. And sometime between that and his next film, he and his fellow collaborator Isao Takahata formed Studio Ghibli, and the first, although the first film under the Studio Ghibli banner came out 2 years later in 1986, and that film is Tenku no Shiro Raputa, aka Laputa Castle in the Sky. Although some titles, some versions of the title drop the Laputa entirely in just call it Castle in the Sky. Partly because in Spanish in particular, La Puta, well, let's just say its meaning in English isn't exactly civilized after dinner conversation. Yes. But that Laputa Castle in the Sky is my favourite of the 13 films he's directed, and I love the music, I love the setting, I love the references to Gulliver's Travels, which I believe is where the Laputa came from in the first place. And Miyazaki actually later admitted that he wouldn't have even used the name if he knew it was going to cause problems, particularly for Spanish-speaking nations and cultures. But what's done is done. Even without the Laputa in the title, the Laputa is still referenced in the story, and the story is still great. Personally, I prefer the original Japanese version. I just prefer the music in that, and I found Disney's original dub of that to be a bit too verbose and added a lot of dialogue where originally there was none, and also even changed some bits of music. I believe that Disney actually asked Joe Hisaishi to compose some music specifically for that particular English dub, because Americans were used to a more immersive experience. So there's not only did some bits have completely different music to the original Japanese version, but there are even some musical cues added when originally there was absolutely no music whatsoever. Personally, I could never particularly get attached to the music used in that particular version. I much prefer the music in the Japanese version, and I also find that the voices by James Van Der Beek and Anna Paquin used to voice the central characters in that English dub. I find them to be rather too mature sounding, to really pass for the characters they were portraying. I mean, we're talking about a little boy and a little girl here, and they're voiced by people who were well into adulthood by that point. To me, that just didn't work. But after that, 2 years later, which I believe was released as a double bill with Isao Takahata's directorial masterpiece Grave of the Fireflies. In 1988, Hayao Miyazaki released Tonari no Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro. And this is about a father and his two little daughters, Satsuki and Mei, who moved to a new house, which is right next to this delightful camphor tree, and it's on the fringes of a forest, and they find it, and they find that despite warnings of the area seemingly being haunted, what's actually supposedly haunting them is not actually nearly as fearful as you might think. And this film also no doubt played a part in giving Studio Ghibli its most recognisable mascot, the titular Totoro, which has been used in the opening card for Studio Ghibli films. That one, not as well as having the environmental aspect, also really captures what it's like to be a little child, and the sense of wonder that Miyazaki's direction instills into it just It's just delightful, and it's hard not to tap your toe at the sample and tune that plays during the opening credits. Once again, music by Joki Seishi. And the closing theme's good, but I definitely love Sanpo. And then a year later, according to a documentary I saw, he was inspired to do his 1989 release after seeing women walk by and seeing how their skirts and dresses blew about in the breeze. And sorry, apologies, that sounds a bit pervy, but nonetheless, it did lead to him another wonderful film called Kiki's Delivery Service, Majon no Takyubin, literally Witch's Express Mail. I believe that's really about the only film of his that whose English title doesn't in any way resemble what a direct translation of the original Japanese title. And I believe Takyubin is actually a postal service used in Japan. It either is or was at the time, and it's about a 13-year-old witch who's bound by tradition to go away from home for a year to train in witchcraft. And it goes into the idea of her trying to find herself and try and figure out her place in life, and the struggles of in doing so, and trying to find acceptance. I mean, another of the rules is that where she decides to stay, there must be absolutely no other witches in that particular city, village, or etc. whatsoever. So of course, she by default she's completely different to everyone else there. They're humans, and she's a witch. And her only skill is flying. So she actually sets up the titular delivery service, and that's how she makes that's how she keeps afloat. And it's good. And it's based on a book written by Eko Kadono, and she actually and she and she actually said that she deliberately made Kiki only have the ability to fly, so that she couldn't just wave a magic wand or cast a spell just to get out of any difficult situation, which in turn made her a bit more relatable despite her ability to fly on a broomstick. Yeah, again, when Disney did a dub of that, they did initially change the opening and closing tunes to something completely different. I believe I can't remember the name of the ones doing the end credits in each case, but I remember that the title of the one in the opening credits in the original Japanese version, it's a song entitled "Message in Rouge," Ruju no Dengon, and it got completely replaced with a totally different song called "Soaring." I think that was its name. Although later releases did away with that, and even English dubs since about 2010 have forced to use Ruju no Dengon and the original ending music, whose name escapes me. But Kiki's Delivery Service is a really charming tale. Despite the fact that the main protagonist, she gets into some pretty difficult times, but manages to stay strong simply because the first time in her life she really needs to. It could be said that Miyazaki did that film ideally to appeal to a female market, and Perhaps to counterbalance that, his next film in 1992's Kurenai no Buta, The Crimson Pig, which was released in English as Poco Rosso, it could be argued that that is more geared towards a male audience. But if you're female, don't let that put you off, because there is still a strong female character in Poco Rosso. I won't spoil the surprise, but basically the titular Porco was once a famed pilot, but some kind of curse has caused his whole face to, well, his whole head to become that of a pig. Hence the Crimson Pig of the original Japanese title. Sorry, I thought that Kiki's Delivery Service was the only title that got totally changed in the West, but apparently, but I completely forgot about this at the time. I do apologise for that slight oversight. And this one, more than any other film he's done, probably demonstrates his real love of flying. Well, I suppose a film that I'll be mentioning later on also does that, but Porco still shows a true love of flying, with some incredibly aerodynamic scenes of aeroplane flight, and the way the flight scenes are animated, you almost totally forget that you're watching traditional 2D cell animation. That's how absorbing it is. And it's just mind-blowing, and as ever, the story's great and the characters are strong, and you can't help but love them. There was one called On Your Mark in 1995, but that was actually a music video rather than a film, and I've not seen it at the time of writing. In fact, when I was researching this, I'd never even heard of it. I'm presuming it might be something that was never released in the West, presumably because Japanese songs, but thought maybe it didn't really have a market outside of its home country. I have to admit, I am intrigued by that, and I might even look it up if I can. But his next feature film was at one point he thought it was going to be his last, as he wasn't exactly getting any younger. In 1997, he released the astounding Princess Mononoke, aka Mononoke Hime. I believe Mononoke roughly translates to vengeful spirit, but when making the English title Princess Mononoke, I believe they decided they tried to make that Mononoke an actual name, simply because it was too difficult to translate Mononoke into intelligible English. So even though it's barely mentioned in the film at all, but it doesn't actually matter. But because Princess Mononoke is actually the only film he's directed that doesn't contain any scenes of flight. All the others do. But this probably goes even more into his love of all things environmental than even Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, which he had done 13 years earlier. It does have some moments of quite intense brutality and even a fair bit of gore, and it's not Ninja Scroll gore or anything like that, but it does still have some moderately bloody moments. But in the context of the film, it certainly doesn't come across as gratuitous. It's there because, again, these horrible humans are causing damage to the environment for their own base needs, and it centers around a man called Ashitaka who while trying to fend off a demon, becomes cursed, and and he's sent away to try and find a way to break that curse, and he comes across a considerable hatred from several people that he comes across during his journey, and it's his attempt to try and see with eyes unclouded by hate, as he puts it. There are some absolutely stunning visual moments in this, and there are some genuinely tense points, and the animation at times is absolutely jaw-dropping. You could really tell that he really thought this was going to be his last film at one point, because he put his heart and soul into it, and for its 2 hour odd length, you get assaulted with some of the most visually striking scenes that still remain with you long after the closing credits wrap. And even when I'm just discussing it now, I can still see some of the mind-blowing images in my head, even as I say this. If you've never really got into to Japanese animation, and none of what you've heard before takes your fancy, then Princess Mononoke is one of those that's definitely worth a look. And I honestly think you'll easily relate to its messages. It doesn't actually spell them out for you per se, but but it portrays it in such a way that it doesn't really need to. And as ever, wonderful music by Joe Hisaishi. And and totally unexpectedly, 4 years later, Miyazaki got inspired to direct another film. Now, this one has a title that both is and isn't a direct translation of the original Japanese. The Japanese title is Sento Chihiro no Kamikakushi, the spiriting away of Sen and Chihiro, which simply got shortened in English to Spirited Away. And Spirited Away just blew everyone's mind, and its acclaim was such that it actually won an Academy Award, beating the likes of Shrek 2, despite the fact that Spirited Away was, for the most part, 2D traditional hand-painted cell animation. And even though the little girl at the centre of the action, Chihiro, is really quite self-centered and selfish, this film actually takes you on a journey where she learns to let that go and actually become someone far more agreeable. And like Princess Mononoke, it has some really incredible visuals and some truly imaginative characters. While as I said, it's not my favourite. My favourite being Laputa Castle in the Sky. It still ranks very highly in my list of my favourite Miyazaki directed animated films. 3 years later came Haru no Ogoku Shiro, Howl's Moving Castle, which is based on the book of a similar title, and that actually got nominated for an Academy Award, but it lost to I believe it was Wallace and Gromit in The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It's kind of a shame, because while that particular Wallace and Gromit film is enjoyable, I still personally feel that Howl's Moving Castle is a bit more enjoyable to experience than that. And that's not just me being biased. I genuinely feel that Howl's Moving Castle's a superior film. I mean, it's not quite up to the standards of Spirited Away, and it's a little bit on the long side, but it's still got some the usual thing of imaginative characters and some flight again. And then 4 years later came Gake no Ue no Ponyo, aka Ponyo on a Cliff by the Sea, aka just Ponyo. This takes some influence from Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, but it goes into the environmental aspect that the titular Ponyo, who's normally a fish, but can gain legs while for a little while on land, and basically be around humans for a short time, can she the idea is that her absence from the sea causes an environmental imbalance. So once again, the environmental scenes being thrown into a story to add a unique twist to it. Again, while the idea of having an environmental aspect isn't unique to Miyazaki, it did put a unique twist to that particular tale, and the way it all works is neatly tied up, and adults and children will, and especially children, will probably be delighted by this film. But it still has plenty for adults to enjoy as well without it being patronising. And 5 years later, in 2013, came Kazetachinu, The Wind Rises. This is sort of based on true life, because it's almost like a bio. It's a fictionalized biographical film, and it features a character called Jiro Horikoshi, and he was an aeroplane designer. In the film, you see him as a little boy who has to wear glasses because he doesn't have 20/20 vision, which basically means he could never become a pilot, but gets inspired to actually design aeroplanes. And once again, this shows Miyazaki's love of all things flight related, and you actually see some not only some really amazing aerial sequences of animation involving some incredibly large and detailed aeroplane drawings. Goodness me, the amount of work that must have gone into that. And especially as by this point Miyazaki was in his early 70s, and at this point this was to be his real farewell, or at least he thought that at the time. This too was The Wind Rises was also nominated for an Academy Award, but I believe it lost to the animated film Frozen. It's kind of hard to compare the two or comment on that decision, because they're such different films. Yes, they're both animated films, but the way they approach things, the way they do things, is totally different. But while again I wouldn't say that The Wind Rises is my favourite, there are still some technically astounding bits in it, and a somewhat engaging story, and there's a great animated earthquake sequence in it, which is also worthy of a look. And as I said near the beginning of this video, it takes a genius to turn a shot of someone who's just drawing plans and writing on a piece of paper on an easel and making it look interesting. But Miyazaki and his team managed to do that. and it's just astounding what Miyazaki has achieved, and I truly believe he is one of the greatest animation directors the world has ever known. At the time of doing this video, it seems like he and his team are working on a film called How Do You Live? At the moment, they're hoping it can be released either later on in 2021 or sometime in 2022. That's what they're hoping for. But it's still being done using traditional 2D cell animation, so obviously that does take a very long time. I guess it's a case of it's finished when it's finished. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want someone of his caliber to feel like he needs to rush a film, just to get it out as soon as possible. If it needed to wait, and if it takes longer, it takes longer. I've given the standard of his existing works. I truly feel it'd be worth the wait, and I honestly hope that the film does get finished, because I, like so many other fans of Miyazaki, can never get enough of his work. And it also must have been quite upsetting for him when Isao Takahata sadly passed away in 2018 after losing a battle with lung cancer. So of course he's having to. He'd been working on this without his dear friend and co-founder of Studio Ghibli, which I believe by yes. I do hope that somehow How Do You Live can be finished, and obviously it'll get released in Japan, and it'll take a little bit of time before it reaches the West, because obviously it has to all be translated into other languages, including English, and that's going to take a while. But I wait with bated breath, and hopefully nothing bad happens to Miyazaki that puts the entire project in jeopardy. I hope it gets finished, for his sake, as well as for the sake of his team and for his fans. But anyway, I think it's time to wind up this video now. I've said pretty much what I need to say. If you haven't looked at any of Hayao Miyazaki's directorial efforts, I strongly recommend you take a look at some. Every single one has something about it that just instills delight and magic and charm, and you'll see why I consider him to be one of the greatest animation directors ever to grace the earth. So happy 80th birthday, Miyazaki-san, and hope, despite the global situation, that you managed to have some enjoyment today. But anyway, that's enough for this video. I hope to catch my followers on another video soon. Texie88 out.